Hi, Dan. Hi, Will. Thanks so much for taking time to talk to us today about your campaigns for Attorney General. How about if we start off by, Will, if you wouldn't mind kind of introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about why you're running and what your priorities would be, that'd be great.
Yeah, hey, thanks for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. I am sixth generation Oregonian. I come from Eastern Oregon. I was born in a little town called Joseph, Oregon, where I graduated from high school. I came to the Willamette Valley to go to law school. And after law school, I was a prosecutor in Yamhill County for a few years, which is a McMinnville. And then I was recruited away to Marion County to join their special victims unit. And so for a number of years, I was a child sex abuse prosecutor. I handled adult sexual assault, homicide, and domestic violence cases as well. But my major focus when I was in Oregon was protecting children from sexual violence. I was then recruited away by the National District Attorneys Association to do child abuse intervention work at the national level. And from there, I was hired by a global human rights organization to lead multinational teams in Africa. And that's where I was 8 years previous to starting to run for Attorney General. So first I was in East Africa, which is in a country called Uganda. In the northern part of that country, they'd had a 21-year civil war. And after the civil war, they had this constant land violence. There's a lot of ex-militants who would come back to this huge populations of widows and orphans and drive them off their land using all kinds of violence. So our team, we would go in, find these women and children in the bush, we'd get them legal title back to their land, and then we'd prosecute the violent land raiders in court. I did that for a few years. And then I was transferred to West Africa, where in partnership with the US State Department, UNICEF, and West African governments, we would work to rescue child trafficking victims. They're just really modern day slaves. And we'd work to prosecute the slave traders and masters. We also got money from the State Department to go to the Middle East and rescue women who had been trafficked for labor or for sex. But most of my focus when I was in West Africa was on protecting children from human trafficking. So I've always been a resident of Oregon. And so each year my company would send me back for a month or two. And just, I'll pause to say when I was, more than a decade ago, when I was recruited to go to NDAA, at the time, Oregon was thought to be on the forefront of victim protection, particularly child protection. And so they were headhunting people like me that were successful in our careers from places like Oregon to do capacity building across the United States. And so to come back over the course of the decade, each year, it felt like I was watching the frame-by-frame death of my own state. Each year I came back, it felt like we were getting worse and worse at protecting people and making people safe, and particularly children. And so over the last 2020, 2021, 2022, we started tearing our criminal justice system down. And I knew at the time, because my entire adult career has been dedicated to protecting children from violence, exploitation, and abuse, that the people that suffer the most when the criminal justice system fails are the children living on the margins and children living in distressed neighborhoods. And that's who is really going to suffer most from the decriminalization of drugs, from the stripping down tools and resources from police, and consistently making the criminal justice system just generally less accessible to the poor. And so it wasn't really my game plan to run for public office, but I felt really duty bound to come back and try to be a wave of new leadership that was going to focus on solving problems and protecting people, making sure people are safe and not so engaged in partisan and radical politics. So I came back about, 19 or 20 months ago, and started this campaign, right away, because I knew that I needed a long runway to let people know who I am and why I wanted to run. So my platform is really simple, but it's also really important. We are objectively terrible right now at protecting children from exploitation, abuse, and violence. I'm embarrassed of the state of things in Oregon. In almost every measurable category, we're in the bottom 10 in the United States. If you talk about teen overdose, teen suicide, online sexual exploitation of children, age that children are exposed to pornography, drugs in schools, the ability for parents to just take their kids to the park without having to see open drug use, violent behavior. We just need and to let alone the DHS is consistently placing children in hotel rooms as a form of host. A host parent is a hotel room. And so I've dedicated my life, as I said earlier, to protecting children from abuse and violence and neglect. And my top priority is going to be using the Child Protection Division of the Department of Justice to start holding DHS accountable to follow the law and make sure that we're the best in the country at protecting children and not almost dead last. And the second thing is
Actually, you know what? How about if because we'll dive back into priorities. I certainly want to talk about DHS. Dan, maybe if you can just kind of give us an intro about why you're running, and then we will kind of dig more into some of the priorities.
Yeah, absolutely. And so maybe I'll just start off. And for those of you that we haven't met, tell you a little bit about some of the things that I bring to the table in running for Attorney General. I would first say that Oregon is facing a unique set of challenges. Again, when you look around the state, we see the same things in every community: housing and homelessness, all the way to the substance abuse crisis we're seeing. And I believe with the right leadership at DOJ, leadership that I want to bring to this office, I believe you can make some meaningful progress in those issues. What I bring to the table is 18 years of legal experience practicing in the state of Oregon, managing a law firm practice, handling cases on one end of the spectrum where we're dealing with insurance companies, foodborne illness cases against large corporations like ConAgra, all the way down to civil rights cases and denial of medical treatment cases. So that is what I bring into this space in a legal sense. From the legislature, what I bring in is I spent a lot of time building a reputation of bringing people together and trying to be a problem solver in these situations. And so in my tenure, whether it was the 4 years as co-chair of Ways and Means, was the 2 years of Speaker of the House, really what we tried to do, and I'll focus on the speaker side, we passed one of the most meaningful economic packages with the CHIPS Act. We passed one of the largest housing reforms packages just in 2023. In the short session, we're able to do something that a lot of people didn't think was possible, which is bring together law enforcement district attorneys to find a solution and make progress on what I would say is the recriminalization of hard drugs, and also give folks tools to get those hard drugs off the street, which is still a work in progress and is going to need to continue to go to be reevaluated in the future. So having that tenure, also being able to have managed a branch of government with multiple agencies, a budget of over 400 million and 400 plus employees, you bring those set of experiences to run for this position. The things that I want to do, and I'll just be mindful if we're going to dig into these, kind of 5 things is what I would highlight really important. One is expand the work we do in our civil enforcement and consumer protection division to really focus on consumers and seniors in that space. That's things like our consumer protection unit. I believe we need to create a working families unit. And we can talk about how we can do those things, but that really focuses on underlying values, whether that's wage theft or child labor violations. When we get into the civil justice side of things, or I would say the criminal justice side of things, we need to better partner with law enforcement and our district attorneys to then make progress. So where we highlight and focus on a value, right now, one of the biggest values that I think we need to target in talking with a lot of folks is our criminal drug delivery problems within this state. And that's an area where you can partner with local DAs, with law enforcement to do that. Obviously, you're not the lead on that. That's done at the local level, but there's a really important role. And we funded some positions, some attorneys and investigators in the short session to actually start doing that. And I would like to be able to take those tools and implement them in partnership with local law enforcement. On the other side of that, you also have, there's a lot of systems improvements and outcomes that need to be done in this state. So when we think about housing and homelessness, there's always not, you don't think that there's a direct tie to the Department of Justice, but we have problems, and I've seen this in the legislature, of getting money when the legislature appropriates it into the hands of the people that it matters most. And right now we have agencies that point fingers at each other, and DOJ is one of the agencies that's pointing fingers in that process. We need leadership to problem solve, figure that out, where when I was speaker, we were creatively redirecting money through DAS to get it into communities because we knew it was going to take time. So that's important. We also need to think about in the criminal justice, or in the civil space, where the Department of Justice is the defense attorney. That's when things have gone wrong. You need to think on the front end about how do you mitigate and prevent things from happening. In the private side, insurance companies aggregate claims data. When you aggregate claims data, you can provide information to your clients, in this case, the agencies, about how to better prevent these things from happening, mitigate those harms to then move forward, which ultimately saves taxpayer dollars, because in the legislature, it's something that goes underreported. But about every 2 years, we have to fund the DAS Risk Fund with additional money. That's our taxpayer dollars going to things that could be prevented. I think what's also important in this role, and you don't run for Attorney General to do this, but you do have to defend Oregon's values from national attacks as they occur. So one example would be right now, there are about 17 Republican attorneys general that have filed a lawsuit to prevent the state's ability, other states' ability to set lower emission thresholds on motor vehicles. This is a new area that I don't think 10 years ago was a big space, but you need someone in this office that has consistent values and knows how to lead in those areas. It's very important. And then finally, I think you need to be able to use your soapbox as Attorney General to advocate on and convene on some of the biggest issues we're facing. Things that right now that aren't getting the attention they deserve, community corrections and our high recidivism rates. When you think about youth justice reforms, I think about specialty courts. In this space, gun violence prevention. That's another really incredibly important area. So those are kind of the 5 areas. Happy to dive in more on those with you, but I will respect that we're going to do that.
Great, thank you. So Dan, let me ask you, that's a pretty broad, or a lot of buckets that you want to be focusing on. What would you say 4 years from now people will know the Department of Justice for if you're elected AG?
In the long-term vision, what I really want to have is a Department of Justice that is seen as the Attorney General for all Oregonians. And you'll see that there is a multifaceted vision. And the reason it's a multifaceted vision, and I didn't even cover all the things. DOJ, one of the largest things that we do is child support. And we actually implement the child support and make sure that families are getting that. We have systems that aren't communicating in that space. So DHS is not communicating with DOJ. There are problem solving that needs to go on in that space to be able to get money into the hands of parents that need it. So know that, yes, it is a broad, multifaceted vision, but that is what DOJ is. It is broad and multifaceted. So what I want people to think of, right, long-term in a consumer protection space, or whether it's on focusing on children, in that space, I want people to look at the Department of Justice and say, this is a place that is my advocate. They're looking out for me. And other states have this. I have personally in my private life, in my private practice, had cases where it was multi-state litigation on consumer protection issues, where it's fly-by-night. There's scam folks that come in and out of community fairs, really trying that prey on the elderly or trying to get out of timeshares. And we have had inability in the private side to be able to prosecute those. When I've referred those to the Department of Justice, it is just like any other law firm. They have to pick and choose what cases they choose because there's limited resources. And in that, some of those instances, people are left in a space without a resolution and some very important, what I would say, very important cases that impact them directly. I want a place where people can go and call to. And again, Helen, to your point, this is a 4-10-year vision to build this. This is not, it doesn't happen overnight, but you're really where you are an advocate for all consumers, all advocates in that space. And I really want to see somebody as a convener and a problem solver, not just put up roadblocks. As like lawyers, we want to put, we get in our heads and we put up roadblocks. A good example would be when we said we need to have insurance for summer schools, right? And that prevented us from getting summer schools set up. I think a good attorney general in that space is, yes, we care about the safety of our children, but let's think creatively about how to get around that. And then make sure we implement the vision of the legislature.
Thank you. Will, same question for you. What would the Department of Justice be known for if you're elected AG? And if you can kind of talk a little bit about how that perhaps would differ or what you would change from the current structure that exists under AG Rosenblum. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry, you're muted.
It's hard to be heard when you're muted. Yeah, public safety. That's the burning issue in Oregon. That's what everybody's concerned about, public safety and corruption. There's a lot of things the Attorney General does, but that is the heartbeat. That's what people are really struggling from right now. So you can expect me as the Attorney General. The Attorney General is supposed to run point on all organized crime. That's by statute. That's drug trafficking, human trafficking, organized retail theft. All of those things are astronomically high right now. So in 4 years, you can expect the prevalence of those things to come down because you'll have a leader at the helm who's actually had success in taking on those kinds of crimes before, and international success and international experience, and the kind of experience that's required right now to take on an international drug trafficking cartel is what it really is. And so to say that we'd leave that to the local level, we'd leave that to the local police is the problem right now. The Attorney General should be partnering with law enforcement across the state. It's not happening. Should be partnering with the FBI and the DEA and Interpol and driving these cases across state and federal lines so that we can hold the people that are really making millions of dollars off of crushing families and communities. We can hold them accountable. And that's just not happening. And then in corruption, I don't probably need to tell anybody on the editorial board that Oregon has an accountability problem. It's consistent misuse or unaccounted for funds, consistent misuse of office, and nobody's held accountable. So I would like to think in 4 years that we create a culture of accountability, that because we would investigate missing money from OHA or DHS or the Oregon Housing, or these consistent agencies that year after year have unreceipted or unexplained expenditures, we wouldn't just send them back to the House Ways and Means Committee where they just give them more money without accountability, that there would actually be an accountability mechanism. And the Attorney General will investigate those cases to make sure that whether it's negligence or bad receipting or it's actual theft. Because in my experience as a prosecutor, if you have bad receipting or bad accounting, there may not be fraud or theft at that time, but there soon will be, because that's where the scam artists go. So I think the two biggest differences you're going to see is a drastic reduction in the amount of violent crime, because violent crime follows organized crime all the time, always has. And you're going to see a state that's less tolerant to corruption.
Do you have any thoughts, Will, on why that's not happening now, I guess, or how you would bring a different approach than what Attorney General Rosenblum has established?
I think there's probably, just across the board, Attorney Rosenblum has done some good things, but across the board, accountability has not been a strong point. I mean, when it comes to criminal law, there's just no accountability. When it comes to government action, there's no accountability. When it comes to state agency overreach, there's no accountability. And so I think we need a leader, and that's what I am, as a leader who understands accountability, understands fairness and justice, and will bring a different approach generally. But it's no secret. I mean, the legislature is dominated by one party: the governor, the secretary of state, the treasurer, the attorney general, the mayor of Portland, the city council, the county commissioners, all one party. And it's really difficult. If this was a Republican-dominated state, we'd be in the same exact situation. But we're built to be a two-party system, to have some sort of tension so that people are at least have to look over the shoulder. And it's just become exceedingly difficult in the state of Oregon for people that are from the same party to hold each other accountable. My opponent was the whip for the speaker, whip for the governor. It's going to be very hard for him to take somebody who is his colleague and his friend and that he's taken orders from, and then start to hold that office accountable if he needs to be. So I think that what I can bring that's different is just an outside approach. I don't have a political background. I don't owe anybody political favors. I just want to see things done right and done in a way that's best for everybody in Oregon.
Thank you. Dan, I'm hoping you can respond to that. I mean, it's certainly no secret that this has been a one-party state for upwards of 2 decades, except for a couple very rare situations. What would you do? Like, how can you talk a little bit about how you would act to hold some of your fellow elected officials accountable?
Yeah, and I think the one thing that I have going for me in the public, and when people look at my voting record, people look at my actions, I have 10 years of experience of showing that I vote my values and my actions are consistent with my values. And it's very interesting dynamic. And I think when you think about the Department of Justice, the integrity of the Department of Justice is the one thing that matters most, especially in a time like now with our democracy, even when there are hints where there are issues in terms of that impropriety. I think that's incredibly important, being cognizant of that. There have been situations where there have been a member of my own party, and I was one of the first one. It was one of the most difficult things to do in a caucus room, to call on that individual's resignation when they're sitting across the table from you. And this was something that a lot of our members did not do. When it came to specifically when the governor in our party as a whole, it's not like that long session was, unicorns and rainbows. People who watched that session closely saw how I led a caucus and disagreed with our governor, with all due respect, and pushed in different directions and things that were not always pleasant and easy to do. I think that sense of independence, the policies that I have pursued have been against the Democratic Party at times, have been against, frankly, both parties and the lobby. At times, whether that was campaign finance reform, whether that was lobby disclosure bills, or even ranked choice voting when I started, where people said, don't mess with our election systems. I am someone who leads with my values, and that's the way that I will lead in the Department of Justice. And so I think that's probably, when you look at my course and my history and pattern of actions, if there are situations where there is public corruption, and the facts are there, you investigate it and you pursue it. That's what you do. That is your responsibility in these roles.
Well, let me ask you, here's a specific situation where there have been a lot of concerns raised about the governor and the role that her wife is playing in her administration.
Mhm.
We've asked for the governor to seek outside advice from the attorney general or from Boley, from the labor commissioner, to weigh in with both an investigation into kind of what has happened in terms of staff members leaving the office as reportedly due to conflicts with the First Lady, but also to provide some guidance in terms of what are good rules of workplace rules. How do you handle some of those human resources elements in terms of bias, power dynamics, et cetera, when you have the spouse of the governor working next to you? What would you, is that something that you would actually independently weigh in on? Is there, at what point would you speak up and say, my responsibility to the people of Oregon is to push back against very powerful elected officials from my own party?
And again, I would point back to the actual actions I've taken in real life where I have done that, and that would continue in the Department of Justice. So for instance, if there was a set of facts that presented itself where it looked like there was impropriety, then you would be required to create an investigation and move forward and then prosecute that if you believed you could pursue it. I think taking it a step further, some of the things that I do worry about, and Mr. Lathrop correctly pointed this out, when you have a Democrat investigating a Democrat, there are perception issues. Now, the decision to not prosecute or to prosecute can be for valid reasons. But I think it's also important to then, whatever decision is done, I think having another, what I would say is we do this in different types of investigations where we have an outside review or an independent review of the decisions that are made, because you can make the right decision. But if the public perception is that there's something there, it is important to say maybe it's a retired judge or retired DAs under those circumstances that have that external review of the decisions that are made. So what I can say confidently in my values and the way that we've moved forward is that if there are facts that, moving forward that there is corruption or there are other issues, that's something we would absolutely pursue independently under the circumstances.
And I do want to bring up one other case, and then Will, I'll ask you the same questions. But Dan, in terms of the investigation into the Nishad Singh donation to the Democratic Party of Oregon, you have a situation there where the AG had actually donated money to the Democratic Party of Oregon while the Secretary of State's investigation was ongoing and could have been referred to her office for criminal charges. Do you think that Attorney General Rosenblum handled that in the right way?
So the one thing to know is that if I'm not sitting in the Attorney General's spot, seeing the information they have, I put a big asterisk on my opinions about that case, because knowing what is there, to be honest with you, in this situation, most of the information I've gathered is from your reporting. What I can tell you is it definitely smells squishy in those circumstances. The way I interpreted what I read, and I don't, is that they're proving intent versus where they were beyond a reasonable doubt is where you got into some squishiness within the Department of Justice and their recommendations. This is a perfect example of where I think it would be helpful is if you have frontline staff making recommendations to pursue or not to pursue a given case, and the Attorney General follows those recommendations. Sometimes it will be necessary, especially when there's public scrutiny and for the integrity of the office, to have an external review to then lend credibility to the decisions that are being made. And I don't, I think that should be happening in a lot of different cases.
Great. Thank you.
Very similar, and I would say it's very similar to when a DA decides to prosecute or not to procuse a police misconduct case, right? We often will have other people come in with an external review under those circumstances because of the political nature of cases like that.
And well, let me ask you kind of the flip side of the question. How would you exert or seek to exert accountability on your fellow elected officials without it appearing as coming from partisan bias? And if you want to talk specifically either about the situation involving Governor Kotek or the $500,000 donation to the Democratic Party of Oregon, feel free.
Yeah, I mean, those are completely different things. So when you talk about the governor's decision to bring her wife on as paid staff and all,
Actually unpaid, it's a volunteer
sorry,
position,
but yeah,
right.
Good correction there. Yeah. The question is that a bad decision or a negligent decision or an unethical decision, in which case the Attorney General can advise if they're asking advice about the ethics around that. But for the Attorney General to actually investigate or prosecute, it has to be a criminal case. And I haven't seen anything in any of that, let's call it scandal, that has led to the level of criminal action. So there's two, one's advice and one is prosecute. That's what I want to say. But when it comes to the question is as a Republican, how am I going to have credibility? How is it going to not look like I'm prosecuting people simply because they're Democrats? I wouldn't even look at it that way. My whole entire life has been involved in protecting people, protecting institutions from violence, exploitation, and abuse. And the equation is never whether or not somebody was a victim, was a Republican or a Democrat, or the Democrat or the defendant's a Republican or Democrat. I've never had that background. I don't look through that lens. It's not even part of my nature. And it would make me pretty hesitant if I was a voter to listen to somebody say that they were going to be the new accountability wing of Oregon's government that's so desperately needed. We all know that's so desperately needed. It's obvious that you've just listed two examples of what happens when you have total impunity, meaning nobody's ever getting in trouble for anything. They just take further strides and further strides away from what is integrity or what is true. And so when my opponent's in the news this morning for flying around the country, going to law firms and taking large checks from law firms that he might either be opposing or be hiring as outside counsel, it makes you wonder why would large firms from other states have a big interest in this race in Oregon unless they're trying to get something in return. There's become this culture of impunity. Nobody thinks they're ever going to get in trouble for anything, and probably the thing you need is a prosecutor who knows how to assess a case, do what's fair, and not look at politics, and just hold people accountable. It's usually not that complicated.
Great. I want to shift a little bit back more into public safety and specifically about just kind of some of the changes under House Bill 4002. What role should the Attorney General's office play in guiding local approaches to drug possession and to counties that are offering deflection? Like, do you see a specific role that you would play? And so, Will, if you could start off on this one.
So can you just clarify the question? Are you talking
Sure.
about local level possession cases, or are you talking about drug trafficking cases?
Well, I'm actually talking about the possession. You're welcome to move it into the drug trafficking question, but I guess in terms of just individual counties' implementation of deflection or recriminalization of drug possession, is there something that you think the AG should do as the top lawyer for the state of Oregon?
Yeah, so typically possession or demand side law enforcement is done at the local level, and then supply side industry level stuff is done at the state level, it's done at the Attorney General's office level. We recently recriminalized drugs. It's yet another law that with enforcement is sort of useless. We don't have a law creation problem in the state of Oregon. We have a law enforcement problem. It's already against the law to deal drugs. It's already against the law to put graffiti up, to throw garbage in the street, to leave your camper on a street for 2 weeks, to you name it, theft, organized retail theft. We have a serious deficiency in enforcing the law in the state of Oregon, and that's a cultural problem that we have across the state. And I think the Attorney General plays a big role in that, because the Attorney General is really Oregon's top cop. It's the chief law enforcement officer of the state. gives advice, trains, and sort of sets the tone for all law enforcement. That's chiefs of police, sheriffs, and district attorneys across the state. It really sets the tone for what's going to happen next. And so when you talk about like things like House Bill 4002, I mean, that's from a legal perspective, it is a complicated and ambiguous bill that was a political compromise. And so anything that's complicated is hard to enforce. And we're seeing that in Multnomah County. It's really difficult to roll that bill out and have it be to match Washington County, Clackamas County, or Wallowa County, where I originally grew up, because it's so complicated and it's so ambiguous. And anything that's ambiguous is litigated forever. So the bill itself is what happens when people do something political rather than what is practical. But whether it's a good law or not, we're not struggling with laws. We're struggling with enforcing the laws, and that's what I bring.
Great, thank you. Dan, I'd like you to answer to that, but if you also want to respond to the question about law firm, the out-of-state law firm donations, I'd love to hear your response to that as well.
Yeah, let's start off with the deflection stuff and the piece. And obviously, I was intimately involved in bringing law enforcement together and district attorneys to craft 4002. It was a bill that uniformly had their support. It was a bill that passed overwhelmingly bipartisan support. Was it a perfect bill, and is there work to be done? Absolutely. And to be honest, I think that it's going to be the work over the next 10 to 20 years as we're really struggling with substance abuse in our communities, and how do you get people on a path to treatment? And so that is ultimately what this the focus is, and the root cause of the issue that we're seeing in our communities is substance abuse. Deflection was that first step. You all know this. You've paid attention to this. This is that first step of trying to get folks who are eligible down the right path. As I was in the speaker's role, as I will be in the attorney general's role, I plan to stay involved in this process and that role of helping to convene people along the way. We have reports that will be coming back, the first set of many reports, because we have to actually study the different ways that deflection is being done and then figure out what are the best practices to get people onto the path to recovery. And the first reports are going to come back in the 2025 legislative session. I plan to be a part of that. I plan to continue the relationships that I built in this process to then move Oregon in that space where we're really looking at that root cause of the issue, which is substance abuse. I think it's also important that when we passed the bill, we had counties, DAs, and everybody saying, this is the amount of money we think we're going to need to implement this. And what we have learned in a lot of the conversations that is not enough resources to be able to implement the vision of deflection. And this deflection is a program that has worked. If you look at Marion County, the Marion County Sheriff and the presiding judge down there will brag about the deflection programs they have down there because they get results and they're being very creative. And so what I believe we need to do is collaboratively, and I think it's important that the Attorney General step in and help convene a global budget of what we need to do as partners together to then implement this. Now, I agree with Mr. Lathrop that one of the other big things in there is drug delivery. And that is an important responsibility of the Department of Justice. And that's something else that I will want to partner with local law enforcement in that space. And again, we did add resources to that in the criminal justice division within the Department of Justice. So I plan to be actively involved in that process because it is one of the biggest issues when you talk to voters, when you talk to families that have somebody that's suffering from fentanyl. This is a big issue, and the Attorney General's office is at a perfect nexus between these to continue to lead and partner with the legislature on moving forward. So, and help, any questions or follow up on that? Okay. And when it comes to in the campaign finance reform, the one thing that got me into this world, and Helen, you probably heard me talk about, like, the first thing that I ever did was when I was 19 and gathered signatures to get campaign finance reform. I will say right off the bat that if I believe that campaign finance reform and money in politics is something that is a problem. It is something that has been a problem for a long time. And I have been trying my best to try and make changes towards that. We are not there. Even with the new law that has passed, I do not think we are there. We have a Citizens United problem long-term in this state. With respect to the campaign contributions in this race and the way we think about things, You have certain constituencies. I've spent 18 years of my life in practice doing national stuff and local stuff and have a lot of relationships in the legal community in this state and actually outside of this state. That is a constituency that likes my vision and the things that I'm bringing to the table in this space. It is very similar to Mr. Lathrop, where he has, over $100,000 of timber industry money or related timber industry money. And you think about the Department of Justice that is responsible for the enforcement of our environmental laws. This is the current system we're operating within in this state. Is the system that I think we should have? Absolutely not. But I'm also the one of the few people in this state that really believes and has been working to change that. And that's not something that's ever going to go away from me. I will always be working to change that, whether it's lobby disclosure or campaign finance reform. And I do think that there's better ways to do this. Ultimately, is the system that we have currently in place. I look forward to the changes. However, it's a system we have in place, and ultimately, I don't think that whether it's myself or Lathrop that those constituencies are going to change until we actually get structural changes in how our democracy operates.
So I don't really know exactly or let me just ask you this, Dan. Is there any risk to, or from what I understand, a lot of these law firms are the law firms that pursue class action lawsuits. Is there any risk for Oregon signing on to these class action lawsuits? Are there, does the state, pay these law firms to go pursue those, or devote a significant amount of staff where that is a potential risk to the state?
No, and in fact, there are so one of the big issues is, do you want to even be a part of a class action, or do you want to individually pursue it yourself? Let me give you a good example. So like we have the opioid settlements, right? You can be a part of a monstrous group of attorney generals pursuing a case, or you can go off on your own. And one of the examples that you want to think about is what is going to get better results for the state of Oregon. So, and I'm going to give you a wonky example, so bear with me. If you think about California and New York, if a settlement and they're leading the lawsuits, if a settlement under those circumstances is divided on a per capita basis, New York and California have an advantage. And so in Oregon, if you are harmed 2-to-1, according to your per capita basis, and California is harmed 1-to-1, we are not advantaged by joining a class action. We need to actually pursue that independently on our own, because we will get better results for the state of Oregon. Now, there might be other circumstances where the state of Oregon might be benefited from joining into a class action. So being able to control some of those elements, and even if it's a securities litigation with our pension funds, right? Depending on how the pension funds are operated, you have to be able to have an assessment about what is best for the outcome you're looking to get. And obviously, in a lot of those cases, there's corporate wrongdoing, whether it's the forever pesticides under Monsanto, which actually in Oregon, we went in on our own. I expect in all of those cases, one of the things that currently that I would really like to have happen is that the decisions for why we choose a law firm, whether we do choose a law firm, because I think that needs to be looked at as well. I think there are certain cases where I think we hire outside law firms too much. But I do think that needs to be transparent to the public about why those decisions, having open RFP processes, so that way that there is trust in how those decisions, and then ultimately why those decisions are being made. But those are things that are very doable. They're done in other states. And it's an area that, I have experience in. I'm looking forward to digging in.
Great. I do want to move on to just the issue of the Department of Justice. One of its primary responsibilities is to provide legal representation to agencies, boards, et cetera. Recently, you have the situation where DOJ and the Department of Human Services settled a long-running lawsuit with organizations that were pushing for improvements in the care for children in the foster care system. It took 5 years, and I think OPB reported $18 million to get there. Was that a good, and Dan, actually, if you can go first on that, was that a good use of taxpayer dollars?
Again, the information that I have is from serving in the legislature. I always put that caveat and what I've read in the news reports. What I can tell you is that a lot of red flags are raised for me. It's part of the reason I said what I said in the last conversation. You have a settlement for $18 million and $18 million on attorney fees. It causes us to really evaluate, is that best handled externally or internally? One of the things, and so this is a ripe area that I think does need to be reevaluated within this state. We could talk about the root causes within the DHS system, which I think is a very important conversation. However, specifically when the DOJ's responsibility and role in that, I think that there's a lot of review that should occur under those circumstances. And I don't know if that was fully answering your question, Helen.
I do want to go back a little bit to legal representation,
Okay.
but Will, if you can, just what's your reaction having heard the news about the settlement and how long it took to get there?
I think it's a total failure of leadership. What you have, it's both on the Attorney General's side and the governor's side. What you have is a state agency that's consistently failing to follow the law, and that law is meant to protect children. I mean, it's not just any law; it's probably the most critical law that we have. And children are dying in DHS custody, and one would be too many. I think it's 13 this year already. And consistently, DHS doesn't follow the law. And the Attorney General's office really plays two roles in the Child Protection Division. You're really playing two roles, right? One is you defend the state's interests, you defend DHS, and you hold DHS accountable. You make sure that the state agencies are following the law. And under Ellen's leadership over the last 5 years, they've taken the dependency cases away from the DAs across the state, and they've centralized them in the Department of Justice in Oregon, and they've totally recalibrated the posture of the Department of Justice to just defend whatever DHS does, right or wrong. And they're losing in court, and we're spending a ton of money losing in court. And more importantly, we're losing children. And it's extraordinarily concerning. And that goes back to the conversation earlier. It's one thing to take money. I take money from timber, or Dan takes money from gas. But when you're taking money from the vendors you're about to hire to handle these suits, or you're taking money from the opponents on the other side of the suit, perception is reality. And the perception is that the Attorney General's office is for sale. There's $18 million that are up for grabs that you can go defend DHS for us. And I'm open to the highest bidder. So there's really two critical issues here. One is we have to hold our state agencies accountable. Lives literally depend upon it. And in the law, it's a conflict of interest to be doing business with the other side. It's a conflict of interest. It's a bar violation, frankly. And so, yeah, the way we outsource a lot of our work and the posture towards how we defend or hold our state agencies accountable is really important.
And how would you hold DHS accountable from the position of AG?
So it's really just that's the job. That's a job that they are the only state's attorney. The Attorney General's office under the DOJ under the Attorney General's office advises the state agencies on what they can and they cannot do, and that's just not happening. What happened in that court case is that the judge essentially assigned an outside arbiter to come in and start telling DHS, or looking over the shoulder of DHS and telling them what to do, because the Department of Justice wasn't doing their job, their fundamental job. And that's been done for a long time. It's not something new. I'm not trying to take the Department of Justice in a different direction. It just has fallen by the wayside in the last 10 years.
And so this would be through legal advice that DOJ provides, that would be how you would seek to exert accountability.
What they can and can't do. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Dan, I'm wondering,
rather than defend whatever they do, you got to tell them what they can and can't do.
Dan, same question for you. In terms of just the legal representation that the DOJ provides, what are the ways that the AG could exert accountability on state agencies or change some of these outcomes, these very expensive and very painful outcomes that we're seeing?
Yeah, and first off, I mean, there's root causes of some of the issues, right? Our frontline DHS employees are unable to provide the social services that they need to be able to provide and take care of. We have a dearth of foster care homes, some of which, and we have to look at that as some of the regulation that has been placed in certain places where the alternatives of where children get placed is a real big problem. So we have some serious root causes of the issues in a broader sense. So I want to really highlight that because that's critically important in the stressed workforces that we have. But specifically when it comes to accountability, and Mr. Lathrop, this is where, like, and I don't mean to be, have a go or be offensive in this space. I think this is where I think there's a little bit of misconstruing of what the role of the Attorney General is. The Attorney General's office does advise our agencies. And so, and what I think the problem here right now is that certain agencies aren't following that advice. That's the difference that I think you'll see in the two answers. And the question is then, how do you remedy that under the situation? As we talk about accountabilities, the roles of the different executive offices, the governor is the chief executive of her agencies and is the one that is supposed to keep her agencies in line. When you provide advice to agencies, you have attorney-client privilege. And so I may want to go, I may want to call you, Helen, and get you on the phone and say, boy, this agency is not following our advice, which at times that does happen, right? And sometimes there's gray areas. Should you settle a case? Should you not settle a case? Now, as the Attorney General, you can't just sit with that information, right? I can't sit there and say, I know that these people are not following the advice. Maybe it's creating exposure in a civil sense. Maybe it's causing a violation of rights.
Are you positing that the governor doesn't have a role in in that partnership relative to attorney-client privilege advice to her subordinate agencies?
No, John, let me get to that. And I'm going to actually directly answer what you're asking. And so I'm focusing in the Attorney General's office, and then I'll transmit how that goes forward. You have 80 agencies, right? And there's a lot of interplay between those. So whether they know each individual decision that gets moved up to the executive branch doesn't always happen. I believe at the Attorney General's office and how you get accountability, right? Because that's not naturally your role. What you do is when you see a situation where, and I'll give you the simple example where someone's not settling a case when they should, because that is the agency's decision, or there are other times where they're taking advice counter, which doesn't mitigate the exposure and the risk to the state. What you have to have is direct line of communications to the governor. So exactly to your point, John, you maintain the attorney-client privilege when you have direct communication with the governor's office to then get accountability. So as the Attorney General, you can't just give advice and walk away. You have to have follow-up under those scenarios. And so that is, I think the appropriate way to seek accountability from this role. And I do believe that there's room for improvement in those channels of communication.
Looks like Will would beg to differ.
I mean, there's a child, in this particular instance, there's the Child Protection Division. There's a whole division of attorneys that's their job, is to do what's in the best interest of the state and make sure that the state is following the law. And there's not some sort of indirect relationship with the governor. Every state agency has multiple Department of Justice attorneys attached to them that are advising them directly. And they report to the Attorney General's office, and it's an exclusive relationship by statute.
And this is where this is really important. And Mr. Lathrop, again, I think that there's just a different set of experiences in this situation. There are times when the Department of Justice makes recommendation and advises those frontline DHS people. You're absolutely right. Those attorneys do advise DHS. But what you're not right is that the DHS does not always follow, or different agencies do not always follow DOJ's advice. And under those circumstances, you can't sit with that information. You need to create a reporting structure within DOJ to then be able to go back to the executive branch to remedy those search situations when they happen. Specifically with that DHS settlement, Mr. Lathrop, that you talked about the $18 million, I agree with you. That was a situation where you could have involved settlement counsel early on. It could have been subject to early resolution. That's something that should have cropped up early in some of those things. In having that additional communication, again, it's just like in my private life where I talk to my clients about what are the right approaches. I may give advice, but it's my client's case and they get to make those decisions. Very similar dynamic. But when in this case, when you're talking about taxpayer dollars, if you're talking about outcomes, we need to be able to have the executive branch involved if things are going sideways according to what the outcomes are.
Thank you. Teresa, I think you wanted to jump in with something.
Yeah, this is kind of related. I have a long interest in government transparency issues. The Attorney General has a unique role as quasi-judicial review of public records disputes. This does create tension when, as you note, both of you, the DOJ may have already advised those agencies about disclosing records. So when the disputes come to the Attorney General, I'd be interested from both of you whether or not you think the Attorney General is striking the right balance between transparency and confidentiality, and whether or not you would anticipate any changes in that balance under your leadership. And Dan, we can start with you.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I have not followed every decision that DOJ has made under those circumstances. What I can tell you is that I am someone who believes in transparency so that people can understand why decisions are being made, or the information that people relied upon to make decisions, or whatever the circumstances may be. And so that's something that I would want to review and look at and have a better assessment under those circumstances. But my value set trends and matches in the area of transparency under those circumstances, and not relying upon, and of course, there's times where you're ongoing an investigation and there's certain exceptions that are absolutely necessary. And there's a lot of cases where in my personal life, whether it was speaker or whether it was in just my role as a representative, we always erred on the side of disclosing information.
Will, what about you?
Yeah, when you look at various watchdog reports on Oregon about our transparency and government accountability, we rank really low. We almost always rank, for the last decade, we've almost always ranked in the bottom 10 in the country. And it largely comes down to efficiency, how quickly you can get public records requests and how much they cost. And there seems to be variance in both of those things. There seems to be some subjectivity that comes through the system. And there's more, as you know, there's multiple touch points on a public records request. So you can just count on me as somebody who's going to make it as cheap and as efficient as possible, because I believe in transparency. I believe in accountability. That's what I'm running on.
Great. Let's see. I'd like to do this fairly quickly because unfortunately we also have a 12 noon. And let me start with you on this, Will. One of the things that Dan has talked about is the importance of defending Oregon values against national threats. In certain areas, Republicans have lagged the Oregonians as a whole in terms of social issues. For instance, protecting abortion rights or access to abortion. Is that something that you would be comfortable doing? That if there are threats by other attorney generals regarding emission standards or anything along those lines, is that something that you feel comfortable standing up for, even if it's not necessarily within your personal views?
Yeah, this is a law enforcement position, not a law creation position. Oregon's law on abortion is well settled. It was untouched by Dobbs. It's remained the same. And I'm going to enforce the law and do a very good job of it.
Thank you. And Dan, question for you. You talked a little bit about just a lot of the different things that you want to do. They seem to really cross outside of traditional boundaries of the Attorney General's office. Is this the office you're really seeking to hold? Like, how would you kind of achieve a lot of those things, like I think you called it a working families kind of unit. Just how does this belong within the AG's office versus something else?
First off, I would actually push back on that. Everything that we are proposing is solidly within the statutory scope of the Attorney General's office. And those are things where I think you want to have an Attorney General that looks out on behalf of all Oregonians. It's really actually taking some of the existing work that we're doing, thinking about consumer protections and expanding that. It's about taking criminal wage theft violations that are not being prosecuted, that the Attorney General's office has the ability to, and then enforcing it so it has a ripple impact into our communities. So I do believe that it is firmly within this. When I made the decision to run for this office, I was excited about some of the opportunities that it presented to really ping at some of those underlying values. And so this is one of those weird nerdy attorney things where you just get excited about something and you're like, okay, your set of civil experiences and your set of tools in the legislative space have really set me up in a place where, yeah, this is where you look at the different roles and you say, am I a good fit with my set of experiences to be able to implement a vision? And this is where I want to be.
Great, thank you. And I'm just going to give both of you just 1 minute to wrap up and say why you think voters should be voting for you or why you're the right person for this. Will, if you wouldn't mind going first on this, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, and I appreciate the opportunity to seek your endorsement, and I hope to get it. 6 of the 8 divisions at the Attorney General's office are really law enforcement divisions, either criminal or civil law enforcement. I'm the only candidate here that has law enforcement experience. I'm the only candidate here that has really any sort of major level executive leadership experience. And so I'm the most qualified for this job just on that alone. But as we talked about earlier, you can't keep electing the same people and expect things to be different. If Oregon was the shining example of excellency for the United States and everything, then I'd say, yeah, keep electing these same people. But if you talk about healthcare, we're bad at it. You talk about mental health, we're bad at it. Addiction, crime, public schools, economy, housing, we're bad at all of those things. So we can't keep electing the same leaders from the same positions, just playing musical chairs saying the same things and expect different results. So I think what I offer is really, I'm not a politician. I'm a public servant. I'm a really hard worker. And I'm a person that people like to work for. And I think I can make a big difference in the state by creating a culture of public safety across the state and making sure that government officials are accountable. And I think that's critically important right now.
Great. Thank you very much. Dan?
I think, and thank you again for this opportunity. I think there's 4 main things that stick out for me, about, why I am suited for this office. One is just the extensive legal background from being in private practice for 18 years, handling a multitude of cases to managing a practice under those dynamics. And that is a big component of what DOJ does. The other part of that is the experience in the legislature, being speaker, having run a branch of government in those dynamics, and also doing it in a way that built a culture of respect amongst both parties. It's why you'll see some Republicans that have endorsed me, Republican legislators that I worked with in the past and currently. You will also see, I think this is really important, is the collective life experience in this space. I didn't take a straight and narrow path into politics. I mean, by the time I was 20, I think I had been arrested 4 times. I had a set of challenges in my life. I didn't graduate high school on time, but it took me a while to get where I am. And I'm a firm believer that your worst moments in life don't have to define who you become. And it's that lens. It's the lens of having diametrically opposed parents, a Green Party and a Republican. Neither of them voted for me in the primary. And like being able to see how we can bring people together because they have the same common values in this space. That's why I led in the Speaker's office. That's why I'm going to lead in the Department of Justice. And then it's just having a multifaceted vision. And with all due respect to Mr. Lathrop, the Criminal Justice Division is a smaller portion. It is a critically important of our division. And actually, we share a lot of the same values and vision in the criminal justice space. But it is also much more than that. And that is why it is important to have a multifaceted vision and someone with an experience that can then deliver on that. I'm excited to do it. And so thank you again, just genuinely thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you both. This was a really great conversation. We
Yeah.
appreciate your time.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to both of you for taking the time with us to share your views and your visions, your vision, and to just thank both of you for leaning in and getting after this. It's a critical role in our state, and I'm glad you're both taking the time and making the effort. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Have a good day.